Wukong is one of the most nerfed Warframes in the entire game, and yet in 2025 he seems better than ever. See, you've been asking me for a Wukong guide basically forever, so today that's exactly what we're gonna do, and believe me, he is so strong he deletes entire maps to the point where the game can't even keep up with the spawns. As always, big shout out to all our generous channel members who help me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, first of all, let's talk about where you can actually get Wukong from, because I think he's a great and versatile option, especially also for newer or mid-game players. All you have to do is go to your clan's dojo into the Tenno lab, and there you will find the blueprints and all his components ready for grabs, and then just build him in your foundry. And yes, because he is available relatively early on, we're also gonna have an easy to put together beginner build later in the video. But you know the drill with my videos. Before we get into the builds, let's first talk about his kit so we're all on the same page. First of all, Wukong's passive is that he basically gets 3 more lives per mission. However, that's not all. On top of that, Wukong will also get 3 out of 5 possible randomly assigned buffs. These go as follows. Number 1 is called Primal Force and gives you 300% more elemental damage for 60 seconds. Number 2 goes by the name Heavenly Cloak and makes you invisible for 30 seconds. Cosmic Armor makes you invulnerable for 30 seconds. Monkey Luck gives you extra loot for a minute. And finally, Sly Alchemy makes orbs 4 times more effective. But alright, Wukong's first ability goes by the name Celestial Twin, and let me just say I have a lot of thoughts on this. At base, what it does is actually very straightforward. You clone yourself and get a second Wukong on the field who is then your loyal ally, follows you around through the mission and also attacks enemies. This Celestial Twin has exactly the same weapon loadout as your main Wukong, and it is also affected by all the mods that you have on your Wukong as well as on your weapons. However, unfortunately there are some exceptions. First of all, the Celestial Twin will not benefit from any effects on galvanized mods. So whatever is down here will simply not happen for them. And on top of that, unfortunately, it also seems like the Celestial Twin can't trigger certain arcanes. For example, I tried it with melee influence and it just never worked, which really hurts because especially in Steel Path, the galvanized mods on your weapons plus the arcanes are the main source of damage, and taking a twin into higher level content without these buffs just kind of feels like you're going into a Steel Path mission on just a mid-game loadout. So you might think if the clone can't deal any proper damage, then at least we can use him as a status primer for ourselves, but here again we have a very unfortunate issue, and that is that as Wukong himself, you probably will be in your exalted mode most of the time with your staff out, and as soon as you pull your exalted staff, the Celestial Twin will also pull out his staff, meaning he will stop using any guns, and therefore he also can't do any priming for you. So yeah, if I'm perfectly honest, in my opinion, the only upside of the Celestial Twin is that you have another target on the field that helps distract the enemies a little bit, but for your overall combat performance, I'm really not a big fan. Now, Celestial Twin also has an augment that allows you to command the Twin to do a targeted slam attack on an enemy, and to be fair, before the upcoming slam rework, I don't really feel it's a good time to judge this, but overall, given the limited nature of your Twin, I personally think it's not all that useful. Next, ability number 2 is called Cloud Walker, and this one is a very simple but also very great skill. Once you cast it, you turn into a shadow cloud, become invisible, invincible, and clear all negative status effects. While you're in this cloud form, you get a 300% movement speed bonus, and you can also freely fly around through the level. And as if that's not enough, this cloud form can also freely go through security lasers and cameras, making Wukong a very good pick for spy missions, but not only that, because of the high speed, he's also great for quick capture missions and such. While you're in the cloud form, you also heal yourself over time, pretty quickly actually, meaning if you get caught up in a spicy situation, this right here is also a very nice panic button. Now, Cloud Walker also has an augment called Enveloping Cloud, which makes all close-up allies invisible when you cast the cloud form, and that might be nice in certain specific situations, but overall, I personally think it's also not really worth the mod slot. Ability number 3 is called Defy, and this is also pretty simple. You become invincible for a couple of seconds, soak up damage during this period, and once it is over, you get an armor bonus depending on how much damage you've received. This armor bonus goes from 100 all the way up to 1500, which is pretty nice, but it can't be changed by mods in any way. Now, overall, I personally think 1500 bonus armor is actually pretty decent because it means you don't necessarily have to mod armor onto Wukong himself, but I also know that a lot of players out there prefer to subsume over it with something else from the helmet, which, depending on your loadout and your playstyle, is also perfectly viable. And finally, we have ability number 4 called Primal Fury, and this is Wukong's bread and butter, his Exalted Staff. There's quite a lot to talk about here, so let's jump right into it. First of all, the Exalted Staff is an exalted melee weapon, independently moddable, now also with Arcane slot. We're gonna talk about builds for the staff in just a minute here, and at first glance it doesn't seem all too special. However, the Iron Staff has some features that I think turn it into one of the, maybe even the, best exalted melee in the entire game. First off, this staff has an incredible range of 3.5 meters at base, but it comes with a special effect where the range increases by 0.5 meters with every combo multiplier. So at the maximum of 12x, you would be at a whopping 9 meters, and as if that's not enough, the Iron Staff is also one of the very few weapons in the game with 100% follow-through, meaning no matter how many enemies you hit with one strike, they will all take the full damage. And combined with such a crazy range, you can imagine the performance of this thing is gonna be absolutely ridiculous. In terms of stats, we have a very healthy crit chance of 25% with a 2x multiplier, and a very high 30% status chance, which overall means we're having very good stats to work with here. But that's not where it ends. The staff also has a very cool feature in that if you do the normal forward melee combo, with the last hit, Wukong will stomp the staff into the ground, which creates a little bit of a vortex, sucking in nearby enemies, meaning this staff comes with its own little form of melee vortex, which, to be fair, isn't all that groundbreaking. The range of this vortex is pretty low and you can't modify it in any way, but still, I think it's a neat little feature that deserves mentioning. But unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because there is one downside to the Exalted Staff, that being that you can't infuse any elements with abilities onto it, so stuff like Volt Shock Trooper simply does not work on this staff. Now, finally, your 4 also has an augment, which has a lot of text to basically say you get 150% bonus crit chance for your staff, and back in the day, I think this was a pretty decent augment. However, in 2025, I personally think it's actually not all that great, because the crit chance from the augment works the same way as crit chance from crit chance mods, and if you run a combo build with the staff, you're gonna run Blood Rush, that gives you 440% crit chance, so much more, and if you run a purely heavy attack build, you would have Sacrificial Steel giving you also 440%, meaning the 150 extra crit chance from the augment doesn't do all too much for you, and I doubt it's worth the mod slot on your Wukong. And as always, if you could maybe leave a like for the video, that would be super duper nice, because it always helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now that we know how the Iron Staff works, let's talk about how to actually build the darn thing, and the most important topic when it comes to that would be the melee arcanes, because basically the entire build revolves around which arcane you choose. Now, with the Exalted Staff having 100% follow-through, meaning no diminishing damage when hitting multiple targets, I think Melee Vortex is actually a pretty darn good option here, sucking in a lot of enemies from afar, allowing you to hit all of them at the same time. Yes, I know, I said the staff has kinda sort of its own built-in Melee Vortex, but to be fair, the range here is so pathetic, I personally think Melee Vortex as an arcane on top is still perfectly viable. Then, another funny interaction would be Melee Afflictions, you know, increasing the number of status effects on the enemy when knocked down or flung up, because I found out that the built-in Melee Vortex effect on the staff actually counts as knockdown to all the enemies that are being sucked in. So if you wanted to, you could potentially make a build around that, but unfortunately, if I'm being 100% honest, the objectively strongest arcane here, and I know I sound like a broken record, is of course melee influence, especially on the staff with the high status chance and the 100% follow through. This is just disgustingly strong, and as boring as it is objectively superior to all the other options. As for the build on the staff itself, it's a pretty standard combo build with Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds, giving us a lot of crit chance and crit damage. Melee influence up here, of course, meaning we have to go for Shocking Touch or any type of other source of electricity. Then Galvanized Steel as well as Organ Shatter for more critical damage. And finally, since this is an electricity damage over time build, we go for a faction damage mod as well as Galvanized Elementalist because that is just the combination that you ideally want to play on every DOT build. Finally, I also went for Primed Reach to increase the range even further from 9 to 12 meters, but this is a bit of a flex slot. You could go for something else here, like for example more attack speed if you want that, or maybe even more base damage. And speaking of base damage and attack speed, you see that right, there is none of that on this build right here. Just wanted to quickly mention that ahead of time. In a minute right here, you will see why that is, because we're actually getting both of that from the Wukong build itself. However, if you wanted to build your Wukong a little bit differently, then you would either replace Organ Shatter or Primed Reach right here with at least one base damage mod. This would be the ideal build for Steel Path in my opinion, but if you're a bit more of a newer player, then we also have a beginner build right here with easy to acquire mods, basically dipping a bit into everything, more range, more crit chance, crit damage, base damage. Here I went for a corrosive build with Fever Strike and Shocking Touch as well as Smite Grenier. But if you wanted to go for a different enemy faction, of course you would adjust these three mods here accordingly. But let's now finally talk about the one reason that you probably clicked on this video, and that would be the Wukong builds themselves. In this video I have 3 different Wukong builds prepared for you. One very easy to put together beginner build with low level mods, then another one focused specifically on Wukong as a spy mission frame. You know, we talked about that earlier, the cloud form being very good for that and all. And then of course finally, the big damage, big number Steel Path room clearing build. Let's begin with the beginner build. This right here would be it. I personally put Steel Charge in the aura, given a bit more melee damage. You could replace this though with anything else. Just make sure to not use Energy Siphon, because you're gonna have your 4th ability out most of the time probably, and Energy Siphon unfortunately doesn't help at all if a channeled ability is on. When it comes to the stats, we focus on a lot of duration and strength. These are the 2 main stats that you want to focus on with Wukong. Strength of course for the damage, and duration so that the cost per second isn't all that high. The energy economy is ensured with flow as well as equilibrium. And then one important thing to mention here would be, I only mod for vitality for the survivability, not for armor at all, because we have our 3rd ability that will give us 1500 armor, and for a beginner build, 1500 armor is more than enough. With this one right here, you should have absolutely no problem to get through the entire story. The next build would be the build specifically focused on using Wukong as a spy frame, because his 2nd ability Cloud Walker makes him invisible, and he can also go through security cameras and lasers with this without triggering any alarm. And what we do right here is we mainly focus on duration so that we can stay in our cloud form as long as possible, as well as efficiency so that we can recast this over and over again. In the aura, you can of course use whatever you like. This right here is just an example. In the Excellence mod, I personally went for Preparation because it is very nice for a spy mission to have your maximum energy filled right from the start, and all the duration that we're having right here comes from Narrow-Minded, Prime Continuity, Augur Message, Constitution, as well as another 36% on top from Mold Efficiency. Then we go for a Natural Talent that gives us more casting speed so we can recast our 2nd ability even faster. And finally, this Arcane slot is a little bit flexible of course, but I decided to go for Arcane Resistance. Ideally you want to have that at max rank, just to be sure that in case you encounter a Toxic Eximus in your spy mission, you don't instantly get nuked out of life. But now, let's finally talk about the big damage number Steel Path build, and as always, the first thing I want to start out with here would be your helmet options. As always, if you don't like to mod for faction damage on your staff, then use Rhino's Roar. This is a universal faction damage bonus, and especially against factions like the Skuldra that don't have their dedicated faction damage mod yet, this one right here will do absolute wonders. Then, another all-time favorite, Nourish, to give you viral damage, viral priming, as well as give you so much energy that you will never ever run dry even if you try. And thirdly, to absolutely nobody's surprise, my personal favorite is Kalervo's Wrathful Advance, given massive crit chance bonus to melee weapons. However, before we go on to the next chapter, I also quickly want to talk about Nova's Nullstar because the other day I saw a video from a fellow Warframe creator called Warframe where he had a very brilliant idea. What he did is, he infused Nova's Nullstar for the 75% damage reduction, basically making the Wukong very tanky, but he also went for the augment right here, Neutron Star, that allows you to deal heat damage with the Nullstars, which in turn makes it that you can trigger Arcane Hotshot to get up to 300% bonus crit chance on your Exalted Staff. To be fair, not 100% sure if this would be my personal preference because I just don't subjectively like Nullstar all that much, but I wanted to mention it here nonetheless because I think the idea is pretty genius, and I'm gonna link you Warframe's video in the description down below in case you want to check it out for yourself. For the sake of my build though, we're gonna go with Wrathful Advance. Up next, let's talk Archon Shards, and as you can see right here, pretty similar to what we've seen on many other Exalted melee frames in the past, we go with all purple, given a lot of critical damage, and make sure that your energy is over 500, because that means this crit damage bonus from all these shards right here will double. Now, before we take a look at the mods themselves, there is one more topic that I would like to address, and that would be survivability with Wukong. In my personal opinion, you have two ways of survivability that work equally well. On the one hand, you have health tanking with armor, and then on the other hand, you have shield gating. If you wanted to, you could theoretically also try shield tanking, but I think in specific Wukong's kit, given you armor, rather wants to be played into health tanking over shield tanking. So, what does that mean for you? If you wanted to play as a health tank, then you either go for triple Umbral if you want to subsume over his third ability. However, if you want to keep his third ability for the 1500 armor, then in my opinion, you don't need to mod for armor. The armor bonus from the skill is more than enough. However, the way I see it, Wukong is also pretty darn good in shield gating, because with the high range and status chance of his staff, combined with melee influence, he's able to spread a lot of status effects to everybody in the entire room. If you then have a Sentinel with Manifold Bond as well as Guardian, taking out all these enemies with the status effects on them will make it that your companion instantly refills your shields if they ever go down to 0, and the cooldown on this Guardian ability is then pretty much 0 because through Manifold Bond, you're kind of instantly resetting it. But yeah, pick your poison here. I personally went for a health tanking approach, and now let's finally look at the build. First of all, let's go over the arcanes, because as I said in the section on the Exalted Staff, my attack speed as well as my base damage for the staff both come from my Warframe arcanes, so I didn't have to mod that onto the staff itself. Again though, if you want to build your Wukong differently, make sure to adjust your staff build to that. In the aura, I went for growing power because I think more ability strength is more valuable than melee damage, since this right here is only considered base damage and we're already getting 180% of that right here. Then in the Exilus, we have primed sure-footed. You don't have to do that yourself. If you wanted to, you could also go for preparation, which is in my opinion a very underrated mod. And similarly to the beginner build, also here we focus mainly on duration as well as strength. The strength in my case comes from Umbral Intensify, Blind Rage, and Energy Conversion. Energy Conversion here is, by the way, pretty nice because it gives you 50% strength, and unlike Transient Fortitude, it doesn't cost you any ability duration, so that comes in very handy here. The duration then comes from Narrow-Minded alone, Survivability with Vitality as well as Adaptation. Again, I don't go for armor at all because the 1500 armor from Defy should be more than enough. And the energy sustain is granted by primed flow as well as equilibrium. By the way, only reason I don't use the max rank equilibrium right here is because I'm too stingy to put a second Umbra forma onto him. However, before you end the video, I have another little tip for you to increase the damage of your Exalted Staff even further, and that would be going for the Grimoire as your secondary weapon. Because if you put the mod Foam Invocation on your Grimoire and then you shoot the alt fire, as you can see up there, you get up to 60% ability strength bonus. However, the fun fact here is that your Exalted Staff snapshots this ability strength bonus, meaning even if it's run out, as long as the staff is still up, it will retain the 60% additional ability strength, and since as Wukong you're pretty much gonna have the staff on all the time, that is a very nice and convenient bonus to have. And if you want to see a list of the very best Warframes in 2025 that really everybody should have, then don't miss this video right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Cell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostalgics Gaming, Turtlebeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio 2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Sorkates the Almighty Rat, Liu Murasaki, Damon, Shadow Lockhart, Trolloloxen, Kiski, Herantaris, Patrisator, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.